This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Minimal Cases. We've talked about Minimal before. These cases are so thin, you'll forget that they're there. But the protection they provide is very, very real. And right now, until the end of the month, Minimal is offering our listeners 35% off of your order, maybe for that new iPhone 11 you just picked up, by using the promo code DIGITDAILY or by clicking the link in the show notes. That's mnmlcase.com and use the promo code DGITDAILY with no space to get 35% off your order, and we thank them for sponsoring this podcast. Good morning, Digit fam. Adam Dowd here, kicking off another week of tech goodness. Over the weekend, I watched a 3-part documentary on Bill Gates and an episode of David Letterman's My Next Guest Needs No Introduction featuring Melinda Gates. Both are on Netflix and both were outstanding watches. So if you have them in your area, I recommend you check them out, especially if you're babysitting a pit bull who won't let you sleep at 4 o'clock in the morning. Long story. But for now, it is September 23rd, 2019, and this is your Digit Daily. Our newsletter says it perfectly when it calls the Huawei Mate 30 Pro the DIY flagship. Well done, Tristan, and welcome back, BT Dubs. Our colleague Bogdan, who you'll remember from Monday's newsletter before he delegated, has now spent 3 days with Huawei's Superphone, and boy does he have thoughts. To start off, Boggs called the Mate 30 Pro a gleaming piece of kit, which is a phrase I will never read correctly the first time. It sounds too much like another phrase used far too frequently in the tech review space, but we should probably move on. Bogdan calls the Mate 30 beautifully crafted but an acquired taste. The software buttons especially, replacing the hardware buttons, are hard to get used to, and note for future OEMs, don't do that. Cameras on the phone are great, as good as the Huawei P30 Pro, which is really, really good. And then there's the super duper slow-mo, not the official name by the way, which shoots at a remarkable 7,680 frames per second. Boggs reports that even finding something that's moving fast enough to shoot is fairly hard, and yeah, that kind of makes sense. I mean, as impressive as it is to see a hummingbird's wings flapping at 720p, how many of us actually want to do that? And of those who actually want to do it, how many of those would be content to just Google hummingbird super slow-mo? In fact, to find out, I've included a link to just that in the show notes. Just be careful, because like everything else, there's a dangerous YouTube hole that you can easily get sucked into. And yes, now I do know what happens when you put a hummingbird into a wind tunnel. Then there's Google, or lack thereof. This is a $1,000+ smartphone that you can't even buy in the US, by the way, that is just flat out missing apps that billions, literally billions of people use. From Google to Netflix, people use them every day. Bogdan says it's like having a supercar that uses a special kind of fuel that you can't buy anywhere. That's a good analogy, but as the analogy king, I'm going to have to overrule you and say I would liken it more to modifying a car with, carburetors and tires and nitrous oxide, and by now you've figured out that everything I know about cars I learned from the Fast and Furious. But anyway, it's like modifying a car so that it's barely street legal and is just a powerhouse chomping at the bit, and then giving it to your grandmother to commute to and from the grocery store with. It's a beast that's capable of so much. It just has the wrong driver. No offense to all the grandmothers out there, by the way. Maybe you're one hell of a track driver, and if so, my apologies. So where does that leave you? At the grocery store with a $50,000 car that's never topped 25 miles per hour in its life? Sure. But also that leaves you with Huawei's app gallery, which has just 45,000 apps in it, but nothing you actually want. There's no Netflix, no Spotify, no navigation apps, no Twitter, no anything. And Huawei isn't even allowed to tell you how to install the apps that you do want. But, as Bogdan says, within a few days, third-party sites will have guides up on how to install Google Play services in your phone, but even then, Google Pay will never work, and apps like Pokemon Go and Super Mario Run, which rely on Google's service called SafetyNet, may never run correctly. Huawei's got some great hardware here, but it's not only bringing a knife to a gunfight, it's got one hand tied behind its back, too. Place your bets on that cage match while we head into the Roundup! Over the weekend, Xiaomi teased its upcoming 108 megapixel camera that will probably see its debut tomorrow and probably in the Xiaomi Mi Mix Alpha, which is a terrible name because after Alpha comes Beta, and you don't call a phone Beta because even the most casual person who knows just a sprinkling of tech talk knows what beta testing is, or at least they know enough to know that they don't want to be a beta tester. Of course, my listeners know that it's even worse being an alpha tester, so let's just not go there. Google has reached quantum supremacy, which is not an Avengers plotline, unfortunately, but rather it's related to quantum computing. What is quantum computing, you ask? Well, I don't really know. I mean, I kind of know, I'll be honest. I've spent my morning watching quantum computing explainer videos, minus a little detour down Hummingbird Lane, by the way. And what I've learned about quantum computing can be summed up in 3 things. 1, it's science! 2, it's basically everything all at once. And 3, it's really honkin' fast. Google's quantum computer solved an equation that would take the world's superest supercomputer 10,000 years to solve, and it did it in less than the time that it took me to report our main story. So yeah, it's kind of a thing, but it's not a thing that you'll have anytime soon. Dell ain't making no quantum computers. But in the world of data analysis and global research, this is very significant. But does it run Netflix? And I think that's the real question. Back in the year 2000, Netflix and Blockbuster met to discuss a potential buyout, and given the state of those companies today, you might think that Netflix was going to buy Blockbuster, and that's probably because today, only one of those 2 companies still exists. But no, back in the year 2000, being a .com company was something of a weakness, and Netflix wasn't really killing it quite as much as they are today. According to the story from Vanity Fair, the CEO of Blockbuster at the time all but laughed Netflix out of the room. But again, only one of those companies is still around today, so you have to ask the question, who's laughing now? Speaking of Netflix, Netflix bought the rights to Seinfeld for $500 million. A day later, Warner Media bought the streaming rights for The Big Bang Theory, a show whose parent company, by the way, has a streaming service in CBS All Access, but then Warner Media paid $1 billion, so what does CBS need it for? But all this begs the question, how much are these shows actually valued? The problem is, no one has any idea. Basically, the question is, which shows will bring in subscribers? And the answer, at least in my case, is probably not a lot of them, because most people pick up subscriptions for the whole catalog, not for a specific show. Except Game of Thrones, that show just prints money. But anyway, the Washington Post breaks down why this is so difficult to figure out, and it circles back to my whole rich people are stupid theory. And finally, a Reddit thread asks the question, you take no damage for 24 hours. What are you doing today? Personally, I'd go along with the person who said swan dives off of waterfalls would be fun, although it should be pointed out that drowning may not be considered damage in the literal sense. So maybe the Sears Tower then? But one particularly brave soul stepped up with really the one true answer that none but the bravest of us could ever try. Eat Captain Crunch with no milk. But hey, you know what can help your smartphone go without damage? Our sponsor, Minimal Cases. Check out minimalcase.com, that's MNMLcase.com, and use the promo code DigitDaily for 35% off. Okay, was that a cheesy ad segue? It was a cheesy ad segue, but you also kind of liked it, didn't you? Yeah, you did. So that's going to do it for today's Digit Daily. If you'd like to learn more about any of these stories, check out the links in the show notes and subscribe to our daily newsletter on Digit.com. And if you like what you heard, subscribe, leave a review, and don't forget to tell your friends about DigitDailyPod.com. Once again, I'm Adam Dowd, Dead Technology on Twitter, and we'll talk again tomorrow.